Every morning, while your gut is in its most vulnerable state, millions of people eat something they believe is healthy and quietly start a chain reaction that drives inflammation, fatigue, joint pain, and brain fog throughout the rest of the day. And here is the part that should concern you. Most of them will never connect the two. I am a gastroenterologist. I have spent the better part of 2 decades studying what happens to the intestinal lining after 60. And the most consistent pattern I see in my practice is not some rare condition or complicated diagnosis. It is the morning routine. The same small, ordinary habit that feels healthy, that feels responsible, that millions of people repeat every single day without understanding what it is doing inside their gut. In my practice, I see this connection every single week. A patient comes in with the symptoms their primary care doctor has labeled as just aging, bloating after meals, fatigue that sleep does not fix, joints that ache without obvious cause, a mood that has shifted over the past year in ways they cannot explain. And when I ask the right questions, the thread almost always leads back to the gut and to what is happening inside it before 9 in the morning. What I am going to show you today is the mechanism, not just what this food is, but how it works inside your body at the cellular level, and why after 60 that mechanism becomes dramatically more dangerous than it was at 40. Stay with me through this, because the solution is not complicated. But you need to understand the system first, because once you do, you cannot unsee it. Here is what most people do not know about the gut after 60. It wakes up in a state of controlled fragility. After 7 or 8 hours of sleep, your intestinal microbiome has been doing something remarkable. The trillions of bacteria living in your gut have been communicating with your immune system, producing compounds called short-chain fatty acids, and maintaining the integrity. That lining is a barrier so thin in places that it is only 1 cell thick. 1 cell thick. That single layer is what stands between the contents of your gut and your bloodstream. And here is what the research now shows. A systematic review published in Aging Research Reviews in 2022 analyzed gut microbiota composition and intestinal permeability markers in older adults across multiple studies. What it found should change how every person over 60 thinks about their morning. Older adults, particularly those with any degree of frailty, which includes chronic fatigue, joint pain, or cognitive changes, consistently show measurably higher intestinal permeability than younger adults. That means the barrier is already more porous than it should be. The gate is already slightly open. And then breakfast arrives. What you put into your gut in that first hour matters more after 60 than at any other point in your life. The system that filters what gets through is already working with less reserve. The evidence says that clearly. And the reason most videos on this topic completely skip over it is that nobody takes the time to explain the mechanism. They just tell you what to eat and what not to eat. But the mechanism is where the real understanding lives. So let me show you what happens inside your gut when the wrong food enters that already fragile morning state. The food I am talking about is added sugar. Not the natural sugars in whole fruit or plain yogurt. I mean the concentrated added sugars in what most people consider a healthy breakfast. Flavored yogurts with 20 grams of sugar per serving. Fruit juices marketed as natural. Cereals with health claims on the box. Granola bars that feel like a responsible choice. These are the foods that millions of people eat every single morning, believing they are doing something good for their body. That is the food. That is what this video is about. And for the gut, the evidence says pretty much the opposite. A review published in Nutrients in May 2020 from the Human Microbiome Research Program at the University of Helsinki analyzed the relationship between high sugar intake and gut bacterial balance. What they found was direct. High intake of added sugars increases the relative abundance of proteobacteria, a group that includes many pro-inflammatory bacterial species. At the same time, it decreases Bacteroidetes, the bacteria responsible for reinforcing the gut barrier and mitigating the effects of endotoxins in your bloodstream. Let me translate that into plain terms. Every morning you eat a high-sugar breakfast, you are quietly tilting the balance of your microbiome away from the bacteria that protect you and toward the bacteria that trigger inflammation. Not dramatically. Not in a way you would feel in a single day, but consistently, cumulatively over weeks and months and years. That is the real mechanism at play. It is not one bad meal, it is the pattern. And the pattern, for most people over 60, has been running unchecked for years. Now here is where the mechanism becomes something that every gastroenterologist finds deeply important, and that most people have never had explained to them. When added sugar consistently shifts your microbiome toward pro-inflammatory bacteria, those bacteria produce a compound called lipopolysaccharide. It is also called LPS. LPS is a component of the outer wall of gram-negative bacteria. In a healthy gut with an intact intestinal lining, LPS stays in the gut where it belongs. It does not cross into the bloodstream. But remember what we established. After 60, the intestinal lining is already more permeable than it was. The gate is already slightly open, and when LPS finds that gate, it passes through into the bloodstream. Your immune system, which has been programmed over millions of years to treat LPS as a signal of bacterial invasion, responds accordingly. It launches an inflammatory response. This is not the acute inflammation you feel when you sprain an ankle. This is chronic, low-grade, systemic inflammation, the kind that does not announce itself with pain, the kind that accumulates slowly and expresses itself as fatigue, as joint stiffness, as a cognitive fog you can explain, as a mood that has shifted in ways that feel like aging but are actually something else entirely. A narrative review published in 2023 with PMID 37505311 described this mechanism directly. The disruption of the intestinal barrier allows bacterial metabolites and endotoxins, specifically LPS, to enter circulation. Researchers now call this low-grade endotoxemia, and low-grade endotoxemia is linked to diabetes, chronic kidney dysfunction, cardiovascular disease, and neuropsychiatric disorders. Your gut controls more than digestion. What starts in the intestinal lining does not stay there. I want to pause here because I know what some of you are thinking. You are thinking, I already eat pretty well. Do not eat a lot of sugar. This probably does not apply to me. I hear this from patients every week. And I want to explain why it very likely does apply to you, even if your diet feels clean. The research published in Nutrients in August 2025, a critical review of ultra-processed food, consumption, and gut microbiota, identified something that changed how I counsel patients in my practice. The fiber added to ultra-processed foods does not behave like fiber from whole foods. It is isolated, stripped of the surrounding matrix of vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals. It does not feed the protective bacteria in your gut the way real fiber does. So the granola bar that says good source of fiber on the label, the fortified breakfast cereal, the flavored protein yogurt, these products are not neutral. They are actively working against the bacterial balance your gut is trying to maintain. And this brings me to a finding that I think is really underappreciated. Before I show you exactly what to replace these foods with and how to structure a morning routine that supports your gut barrier instead of eroding it, you need to understand one more piece of the mechanism, because this one connects everything else. And it explains why, after 60, the stakes of this morning decision are higher than at any other point in your life. In 2024, researchers at the University of Illinois published a study in Aging Cell that used the term immunogenic signature to describe what happens to the gut microbiome as we age. The study demonstrated that the gut microbiota itself, as it ages, shifts toward a composition that actively amplifies the immune system's inflammatory response. The gut bacteria of older adults, on the average, carry more features that trigger immune activation than the gut bacteria of younger adults. That is not a minor finding. Science is telling us that after 60, your gut microbiome is already primed toward inflammation as a baseline state. Not because something is wrong with you, because that is what happens to the human intestinal ecosystem with time. And what does added sugar do to that already primed system? It feeds the pro-inflammatory bacteria. It further erodes the intestinal barrier. It allows more LPS to cross into the bloodstream. And it does all of this in the first meal of the day, when the gut microbiome is transitioning out of its overnight state and the intestinal lining is at its most sensitive to what you give it. The morning is not a neutral time for your gut. It is the window that sets the inflammatory tone for the entire day. This is what I tell my patients when they come in with symptoms they have been attributing to age for years. The fatigue, the joint stiffness, the mood, the brain fog. What most doctors are treating as separate conditions is actually one problem. And it starts here, in the intestinal lining, in the first hour after you wake up. The science on this is clearer than most people realize. And this connection wasn't understood 10 years ago. Now it is. Let me walk you through an illustrative scenario. Let's call her Margaret, 67, retired nurse. Margaret came to my practice 8 months ago with a chief complaint she had been carrying for 2 years. Persistent fatigue, diffuse joint aching that her rheumatologist could not pin to a specific diagnosis, and what she described as a mental heaviness that antidepressants had not fully resolved. Her blood work was largely unremarkable. Her primary care physician had told her, on more than one occasion, that this was likely the natural progression of aging. When I took her dietary history, Margaret's morning routine looked like this: a glass of orange juice, a bowl of fortified cereal with low-fat flavored yogurt, and a piece of whole wheat toast with jam. By every conventional nutritional standard, this breakfast looks responsible. It looks like someone who is trying. But in gastroenterological terms, Margaret was starting every single day by delivering a concentrated bolus of added sugar to a gut that was already shoving markers of increased intestinal permeability. She was feeding the pro-inflammatory bacteria. She was quietly opening the gate every single morning without knowing it. Within 12 weeks of restructuring her morning routine around whole foods and eliminating the added sugar from her breakfast, her energy had measurably improved. Her joint stiffness had reduced. She described the mental heaviness as largely lifted. I am not telling you this because I want you to think this is a cure for anything. I am telling you because this connection is real, it is documented in the research, and nobody had ever explained the mechanism to Margaret before she walked into my office. Here is how I would actually approach this if I were restructuring my own morning routine based on everything the research shows. The first step is identifying the hidden sugar sources in your current breakfast. Read labels for added sugars, specifically not total sugars. Anything above 5 grams of added sugar in a single breakfast item deserves a second look. Flavored yogurts, fruit juices, granola, most breakfast cereals, and sweetened protein drinks are the most common offenders, and many of them are the exact foods that carry health claims on the label. The second step is replacing, not eliminating. Your gut microbiome needs fuel in the morning. The bacteria that protect your intestinal lining specifically need fermentable fiber and polyphenols. Whole fruit with the fiber intact is different from juice. Plain full-fat yogurt with live cultures is different from flavored yogurt with added sugar. Oats cooked from scratch with berries are different from packaged granola. The matrix matters. The processing matters. The third step is understanding that this is not about perfection. It is about the pattern. The research on gut microbiota is consistent on one point. The microbiome responds to dietary changes within days, not months. The bacterial populations shift relatively quickly when the input changes, which means if you change your morning this week, your gut lining is already beginning to respond. And none of this requires expensive products or complicated protocols. It costs you nothing but attention. That is the elegance of the mechanism when you understand it. What I want you to take away from this video is not a list of foods to avoid. What I want you to take away is the mechanism. Because when you understand that your intestinal lining is the barrier between your gut and your bloodstream, and that the integrity of that barrier is directly influenced by what you eat in the first hour of your day, then breakfast is no longer just breakfast. It is the decision that sets your inflammatory baseline for the next 16 hours. You now know something that most people your age do not. And that knowledge gives you the ability to ask better questions, make different choices, and understand why you feel the way you feel in a way that goes deeper than it is just aging. If you know someone over 60 who starts every morning with juice, flavored yogurt, or a bowl of fortified cereal, share this video with them today. Not tomorrow, because tomorrow morning they are going to wake up and repeat the same routine without understanding what it is quietly doing inside their gut. There is a video on this channel that goes one layer deeper into what happens to your gut microbiome when you take common medications on an empty stomach in the morning. The connection between medication, timing, intestinal permeability, and systemic inflammation is one of the most underappreciated topics in geriatric gastroenterology, and it builds directly on everything we covered today. I will have it linked on screen right now. If this channel gives you the kind of explanation your doctor rarely has time to provide, subscribing means you will see it when the next one is ready. Your gut controls more than digestion.